Welcome to the debate.
Our discussion today really confronts a paradox. Why is it often strangers, or, people we barely know, are so-called weak ties who offer the most powerful opportunities and the deepest belief, while our oldest, closest companions, our strong ties, seem to create, inertia?
Exactly. It's a recurring theme across philosophy and social science, this idea that the people closest to us can sometimes become the biggest psychological barrier to our evolution.
So the central question we have to tackle is this. Does familiarity inherently create resistance to growth? Does it make embracing new connections a necessary precondition for evolution and opportunity?
I'm going to argue that yes, it does, that the inertia, the outdated expectations, and the psychological mechanisms inherent in familiarity actively stifle growth, meaning we must prioritize refreshing our support systems.
And I'll be challenging that framing because while I concede that, sure, bad, strong ties can be inhibitors, I worry that this analysis places the blame on proximity itself. It ignores the rare and necessary role that deeply cultivated relationships, what the philosophers call the friendship of virtue, play as the most potent and enduring source of support. The problem isn't familiarity, it's a failure to cultivate quality.
Well, let's look at the evidence for why we might need to move away from the familiar. The core issue, I think, lies in the psychology of information density. I mean, think about the research by Norton, Frost, and Ariely. Their findings suggest that the more information we gather about someone, the greater the statistical likelihood we find reasons to critique or even dislike them.
And this isn't intentional sabotage, it's just cognitive bias. In close relationships, we accumulate this immense file cabinet of historical data, every failed project, every moment of self-doubt, every single inconsistency. So when you declare a bold new goal, your strong tie filters that announcement through, decades of your previous limitations. They possess what I call entitlement over limitations. They feel entitled to remind you of the past version of yourself, which just creates immense resistance. They are, sociologically speaking, a stagnant circle.
That psychological inertia is powerful, I see that, but I worry that analysis is a bit too harsh on the premise of proximity itself. We seem to be conflating the quantity of information with the quality of the relationship. You're describing the failure of friendships based on convenience or pleasure, the friends who are only there because of a shared history, not shared values or mutual admiration for character.
Okay, but how common is that?
Well, the philosophical tradition, specifically Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, offers a really necessary refinement here. He distinguished between friendships of pleasure, utility, and virtue. The dismissive laughter you described, that you starting a business, that's characteristic of the first two. It's based on superficial or transactional needs. It's a failure of respect, not a necessary consequence of history. A true strong tie, a friendship of virtue, is built precisely on mutual admiration for the other's potential and their character growth. That type of tie is the deepest support possible because they see your whole journey and still choose to believe in the next step.
But how common is that friendship of virtue? I mean, empirically, it is exceptionally rare. We have to deal with the reality that most people are operating within relationships defined by utility or pleasure. And that is where the sociological evidence regarding weak ties becomes, frankly, indispensable. Mark Granovetter's work on the strength of weak ties shows they are critical because they provide bridging social capital. Strong ties provide bonding capital, emotional support, shared resources within the group. Weak ties, however, provide the crucial bridge to information, to ideas and opportunities that are non-redundant. Your close circle knows everyone you know. They share your information pool. It is the acquaintance, the traveler, the person you met once at a conference who provides the novel information that breaks you out of that stagnant routine. Okay, I concede entirely the value of bridging capital for opportunity. Weak ties are marvelous for access to new information, new jobs. I get that. But let's define the nature of that support. It is fundamentally transactional. The weak tie sees your current potential, offers an opportunity, and, often moves on. They offer utility, aligning perfectly with Aristotle's friendship of utility.
And that's a bad thing?
Not bad, no. But my concern is confusing that utility, that external spark of opportunity, with the complex, sustained, and often uncomfortable process of evolutionary support. True growth requires not just a new job lead, but someone who understands the deeper historical patterns you have to overcome and who is willing to hold you accountable over the long term. A weak tie provides the initial push. A strong tie, if it's properly cultivated, provides the sustained nurture.
I think you're overlooking the sheer power of the new set of eyes that a weak tie provides. They aren't encumbered by your history. They meet you at your current level of competence and potential without the constant comparison to the person you were at 16 or 25 or even just last year.
Okay, fair point.
Let's go back to the psychological findings, because this mechanism of resistance is key. When your strong tie laughs at your ambition, it's often due to cognitive dissonance. You are presenting a new reality that threatens their established, comfortable mental model of who you are. To accept your evolution means they might also have to accept that they are stagnant or that their own understanding of you was incomplete. And that mental effort is taxing.
Right.
The study findings confirm that the visibility of flaws leads to critical distance, which can translate into resistance to your growth. The friend who grew up with you is often the first to dismiss the new venture because they have the most to lose, the comfortable, predictable status quo of the relationship.
You're assuming malice or pure self-interest, and I just don't accept that the resistance is inevitable. I come at it from a different way. Deep historical context, while yes, it carries the weight of past mistakes, is necessary for accurate guidance.
How so?
A stranger might look at a Beaker's new bread and say, "That's lovely. You should open a shop." Which is encouraging, sure. But a true, strong tie might say, "That bread is excellent, but I know you struggle immensely with accounting and self-promotion. Let's solve those practical steps first." That challenging, difficult feedback rooted in knowledge of your genuine limitations is infinitely more valuable than easy encouragement. The visibility of flaws in a good relationship leads to effective, tailored support, not just dismissive contempt. We shouldn't condemn the tool, the history, when the user, the friend, fails to use it constructively.
But what happens when the history isn't used constructively? When it becomes a literal cage? The burden of an outdated identity is immense. We have all experienced that feeling of being seen only through an old frame imposed by familiar people. They say things like, "That's not how you do things," or "We know your limitations better than you know them yourself." This is precisely why figures like Epicurus, facing a similar dilemma, strongly encouraged building new intentional communities rather than relying solely on old inherited companions. He recognized that for philosophical and personal advancement, you have to find new soil that is ready to accept the new seed. The familiar circle often imposes their own lack of ambition, and you are forced to shoulder the added burden of changing their perception of you before you can even begin your actual work.
I think we have to be extremely careful when applying ancient philosophy, particularly Epicurus's advice to, flee society and form new communes, to the modern structure of relationships. The context is very different, and while history can impose limitations, we have to recognize that history also defines loyalty and investment.
But what if that investment is in your stagnation?
Well, look, a weak tie meets you at your peak, at your current level of polish. A strong tie has witnessed the years of effort, the false starts, the vulnerability. That friend has a unique and vested stake in your success. When they challenge you, it should come from a place of earned loyalty, not dismissal. Abandoning those relationships simply because they challenge your new identity is to prioritize the superficial ease of new companionship over the profound value of demanding to be seen and knew by the people who matter most. I think true growth demands that you change the relationship, not just leave it.
But demanding change within a relationship that is fundamentally rooted in pleasure or utility often just leads to exhaustion and stagnation for the growing individual. And that brings us back to the practical standards we have to embrace. I acknowledge your ideal, the friendship of virtue, but it is, by definition, the exception, not the rule. If a person is stuck in a strong tie circle that misunderstands and underestimates them, inertia will prevail. Pragmatism dictates that they must refresh their perspective and energy.
So it's a choice between...
It's a choice between stagnation and strategic utility.
An individual seeking evolution has to welcome new perspectives and embrace new people for that new energy. It's a survival mechanism. The goal isn't to replace deep love, but to find the activation energy that the inert circle cannot provide. The weak tie provides the necessary utility to get the project moving, and that momentum is sometimes the only thing that will eventually force the strong tie to update their frame of reference.
That's a compelling argument for necessary tactical shifts. But I worry about the underlying philosophy. The source material seems to encourage a constant refreshing, almost a disposability of relationships, which might lead to an over-reliance on purely transactional utility ties. If we constantly discard companions who haven't quite reached the rigorous, idealistic standard of virtue, we risk prioritizing superficial movement over deep mutual growth. We end up curating an audience of admirers who simply reflect our current state rather than finding partners who challenge us to reach a higher state. The goal, I maintain, shouldn't be to just flee the perceived dry soil of old relationships, but to strive to transform those relationships into something more profound. If we accept the premise that weak ties are indispensable for opportunity, we must also accept that true, deep fulfillment requires relationships that offer more than mere utility.
I'm not convinced by that, because it places the burden of change entirely on the evolving individual to transform their inert companions, rather than placing the seed where it can naturally sprout. We're talking about maximizing potential, and sometimes that requires recognizing when a relationship has fulfilled its function for a particular phase of life.
And I remain unconvinced that true, sustained personal development can be built solely on the foundation of acquaintances whose primary connection to you is transactional. The question is, what kind of support sustains you when that utility runs out?
Our discussion has certainly illuminated the delicate and often painful trade-offs required when navigating personal evolution.
Indeed. The interplay between historical commitment and novel opportunity is really central to growth.
I have to reiterate my perspective. While deep, strong ties are essential for emotional anchors, the evidence shows that psychological inertia, outdated frames, and the difficulty of challenging the status quo often mean that growth requires intentional movement toward new connections. If your strong ties see only the past version of you, you must seek new eyes that are unbound by history to realize your full potential. I think pragmatism dictates this approach.
And I would conclude that while weak ties are invaluable for opportunistic growth and accessing novel information, the true crisis lies in the failure to cultivate high-quality strong ties. Before abandoning your history, you have to ask if your current companions are failures of proximity or simply failures to reach the rigorous standards of a friendship of virtue. The deepest support for your evolving identity must come from an invested ally, not just an appreciative audience.
Ultimately, understanding the different forms of capital and support available, both the bonding capital of the strong tie and the bridging capital of the weak tie, is crucial for anyone seeking comprehensive personal and professional evolution.
Weigh the necessity of novelty against the depth of history and choose your support system wisely based on your current goal.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.